I frequently have school owners reach out to me because they're not, quote, getting enough students. And a lot of times this problem is framed in this reductionistic way. I'm either getting students or not getting students. And one of the things that I have to do when I'm speaking with someone who's trying to solve this, what comes to a marketing and sales problem, is figure out what part of the funnel is breaking down for them. Or is there a funnel at all? Are there multiple parts of the funnel that are breaking down? Now, over the last 5 years, I've released content in various forms, both on this podcast and even under the banner of Growing Music Studio, just videos that I've released about the sales funnel for a school, because it really is the lifeblood of that school. There's a great video I did in 2020. I didn't do a lot of videos in 2020. I did the Quarren streams, and then I did one video, which I think is one of the best ones I ever produced, called Why Your Studio's Invisible and How to Fix It. And I even talked about, in a small way, the topic that we're going to dig into a little bit more today. About a year ago on the podcast, we did a podcast episode on your school's sales process, your studio sales process. And I touched on it again in the context of a bigger discussion of the funnel and the sales process. But today, Nate was thinking of talking about, and I'm really excited to talk about, something that BMF does and the processes around this particular topic, which is a small sliver of that sales funnel, and that is the lead and follow-up process. And so we're going to dig into that, look at what BMF does. As we often say, BMF is a really good case study, a really good symbol for what a large school or a school that's aspiring to be large should be doing, because of the size that they've kind of grown to. So Nate, I'm really excited to kind of dig in. I have my own personal hobby horse around this. I have my soapboxes I stand on. I haven't really ever heard you talk about this part of the sales process, which is that getting people from being a lead to that critical part where we're doing follow-up, and how you do this in the context of a team. Because I have talked ad nauseum about how I did it personally.
Right.
But there are subtleties to it when you are delegating this very important responsibility.
Yeah. This is, I love this piece because it combines two things that I'm really passionate about. Number one, it's building systems that are sustainable and repeatable. Right. And number two, it's around enrollment and making sure that you are going through the necessary steps to find those families that you can serve for 7 to 10 years in your program. Because at the end of the day, no matter how great a curriculum it is that we've developed at Brooklyn Music Factory, no matter how passionate I am around songwriting and game-based learning, if I don't have families to serve, what the hell am I doing? Right? So it's like, I want to find families that we can serve, and I want to find families that we can serve for their entire musician's journey at the factory, 7 to 10 years. Can I open with a quote, Daniel, though, from one of my mentors? He just released a new book. Can I read you something before we dig into the weeds?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This is by Clayton Mask. It's called Conquer the Chaos. It's one of these books that I oftentimes will send to coaching clients just to get started, because I'm like, hey, this is the roadmap that was taught to me. And I think, let me just share this with you, because there are pieces in there that are really, really important to me. And I try to adopt them in my own life. And hopefully Clay's okay with this. I'm going to read from his latest edition of Conquer the Chaos. It says, only 2% of sales close on the first contact. 3% close on the second contact, 4% close on the third contact, 10% close on the fourth contact, and here's the zinger, Daniel. This is after they surveyed hundreds of thousands of businesses that were using their tool called Keap to do their sales process, their sales funnel. Check this out. 81% of customers close on or after the fifth contact. 81%. Dig it. So this is my inspiration for today's episode.
This episode?
Yeah.
Well, before we even jump into it, I've got to ask you a question about what you just read there.
Totally.
Help define for us what does he mean by a contact? And I imagine this goes right in with maybe even how you wanted to open what you wanted to talk about today. But
Yeah. So
what does that stat mean?
what does it even mean? Yeah, let's just define the terminology before we get into the weeds and why it's actually important that you follow a very predictable system. So a sales funnel is really simple. It's big on the top, basically consider it to be your website. And when someone goes to your website, and you do great training on this, Daniel, someone says, I'm interested. This parent says, this school looks like it's aligned with my values and purpose and what I want in a music lesson. They fill out a form. As soon as they fill out a form, they become what we call a lead, or what Clayton calls a contact, right? So that's the lead. And then you make contact with them. And I'm going to get into it right now. I thought, Daniel, what I would do is just share exactly what Brooklyn Music Factory does to begin. So if you only have like 10 minutes to listen to the pod today, at least you have a little like playbook that you can walk away with.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
I love it.
So
getting really practical right here at the beginning.
Right out of the gate, which is not always how I roll, but I'm going to roll it this way today. Okay. So super practical right out of the gate. First thing that the Brooklyn Music Factory does is know exactly what our enrollment target is for the season we're in. So, for example, we're currently, when you're listening to this pod, we're in the middle of the fall season. We have a very specific enrollment target. We break it down by private lessons. We break it down by group classes. So it's like, how many private lesson enrollments do we need to meet or exceed our budget? How many group class students do we need to meet or exceed our budget, right? So there's revenue in budget, and then there's expenses in budget. We're talking about that revenue piece. So that's number one. We set clear enrollment targets. For Brooklyn Music Factory in the fall of 2024, the enrollment target is something like 485 total number of after-school students, about 200 and I believe 250 of those, or 65 of those, are private lesson. The rest are group classes spread out amongst our mini keys, Jam Band 101, and Rock, Write, and Record, as well as adult bands. So number one, you need enrollment targets. If you don't have any enrollment targets, reach out to Daniel and I, or definitely let us know that you're interested in joining the Founders Forum, because the Founders Forum is where we're going to be talking in detail about setting enrollment targets. Anything you want to add to that, Daniel, before I get to step two?
Yes, and that is just a few weeks away. So go over to greatmusicstudio.com/forum to get the information about that, because you'd be working with Nate and I on getting incredible systems going. But this is not the kind of thing where you're just sitting and watching hours and hours and hours of video. We know school owners are busy. For those of you who've taken trainings from me before, you might have this impression where it's like, oh yeah, this is going to be like 30 hours of video to watch. That is not how we're running the forum this year. And you should definitely go check out that page I just mentioned to get a little bit more information about that. Perhaps even book a call with us to talk about getting into that, because we are just a few weeks away from that when this episode airs. So that's all I'll say. greatmusic.com/forum.
Dig it. And that's a done with you, right? Like, one of the things that Daniel and I are super excited about the forum is that we're actually going to be doing the work together. So I may literally be working on my enrollment targets for 2025 and beyond at the same time you're working on yours. So just be like side by side working together. It'll be beautiful. Okay. Here's what we do at the factory then as a sales team. The next step is, so you've got your target. As a group, you all agree that this is what you're aiming for. You have to have a target. You have to know where you're going. Otherwise, it just feels like every day you're just trying to add more and more and more and more and more. And then you never have a sense of where you're heading, right? So targets are key. Number two, as a team, we're committed to 5 touch points for all leads. Why is that so important? I literally read out of this same book to our sales team just the other day to remind them of this study that was done, and to say, look, if we give up after 2 sales touch points, we're likely missing out on over 75% of all the families that would be interested at Brooklyn Music Factory. Okay, so as a team, we get committed to the 5 touch points for all leads that come through. Here are the 5. Here's the order of the way we contact each lead. First is an email. They asked about mini keys. We have a templated email about mini keys. Our group songwriting class for ages 4 and 5. Second, we call them. Third, we email them again. Fourth, we text them. And the fifth contact is another email. Email, call, email, text, email. We try desperately to just simply do it in that order every time. Dig it? So you have to have, if you're working with a team of salespeople, the goal is to get them to all commit to the same process. We'll talk about why later. Next, as a team, we track all our lead measures. We basically have a Monday through Sunday. For those that are working, on the day they're working, they mark down on that. It's a simple Google Sheet, number of calls, texts, and emails they sent that day. Each one individually does it. They fill it out themselves. If nothing's filled out, I assume they didn't do any sales that day. It's that simple, right? The next thing we do is, as a team, we each individually track all our lag measures. So if number of calls, texts, emails sent each day is what we call a lead measure. In other words, it's an action that you actually can control. You can control this action. You can decide to send an email or not. Nobody's getting in the way of you sending an email. But you can't decide whether that family, that parent, is actually going to give you a credit card and enroll, right? You can't decide that for them. So that's why we call that a lag measure. That's the result of all of the actions, the lead measures you take. So each team member tracks their own. It's the same Google Sheet. It just says, how many private lesson students did you enroll today? How many group class students did you enroll? Again, it's just on their own. Nobody's watching over their shoulder. They just, as a salesperson, as an enrollment person, we have 3 right now at the factory, they each report, they self-report. Dig it? And then finally, the J team, Jessica, she's the one who reports either every 3 days or weekly, depending on the season. If we're in a heavy enrollment phase, for example, August and September, I'm going to ask her to report for the whole team the total number of enrollments in private lessons, the total number of enrollments in group classes as of that day, and then the percentage towards the target that we are, right? So in other words, if we've enrolled 100 private lesson students and we need 200, we're 50% of the way there. And she writes down the percentage. And that's exactly what we do. That's our sales system. Boom, 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 boom. Jessica, as director of sales, reports to me as CFO because I manage the budget and make sure we never run out of money. That's my number one responsibility in that role. Don't run out of money, right? She reports to me how close we are to reaching our enrollment target. Because if, for example, we're somewhere where we're not, like we're only 60% of the way, and I'm going to have to start writing payroll checks in about a week, I'm like, wait a minute, we need to adjust the budget. So anyways, we can get into some of the whys, but that's the steps we take. That is the entire sales lead funnel follow-up structure.
I have a number of questions.
Fire.
So I'm going to start with this might even seem, given the weight of everything you just said, this might even seem like a little bit of an underwhelming question first, but I'm just wanting to get into the details here. You talked about how 80% of sales happen after that 5th contact.
Yep.
What happens if you get in touch with the person on the 1st contact?
Okay, great.
Are you still following up with them even after you've made that contact? Like, do you see what I'm getting at there?
Totally. In other words, when do you make an offer? When do you actually say, are you interested? Can you get close?
Yeah, how do you guys do it?
Yeah, how we do it is, first of all, we have discovery calls all the time with families.
Okay.
And that discovery call is an opportunity for them to ask all their questions, for us to share what's unique about Brooklyn Music Factory and how we might be a perfect fit for their family, just like you're saying. But then what we actually do is, if you're on a call, that means they're very interested. That's an extremely hot lead. So you're going to make an offer then. You're going to say, hey, I've got 2 spots left in Mini Keys on Saturday. How does that work for you? If so, if you're like, that's great, we have risk-free, at Brooklyn Music Factory, we have a risk-free registration process. You get to try 2 classes. If for any reason you're not fully satisfied, we'll refund all of your tuition. So you want me to go ahead and reserve that class for you? If they say yes, you got two options as a salesperson. One, you can take the credit card right there and register them. Or two, we just have a form template email, which is like, here's the link to that class. Click this button, register yourself. It'll allow them to pay the $95 deposit. Done. They're now a customer. Oftentimes, so that's option A. Option B is they say, you know what? Let me talk about it with my husband. I just got to figure out if that's going to
Sure.
work, right?
Yeah.
That means you're on to number two. You've called. Well, number three is an email. You just simply send an email follow-up saying, hey, wondering if you still want to hold that class or if you have any other questions. If you don't hear back from them, you're on to contact number four. You're texting that mom, hey, just checking in to see if you still want to hold that spot. There's only one left. Let me know if you have any questions, right? Does that answer your question, Daniel, in terms of just the process and what we're going to do actually around making the offer?
Yeah, it actually surfaces a whole new raft of questions for me. So I love the simplicity of that process. And one of the things that undergirds this episode is just being effective at the follow-up process so that you guarantee sales.
Yes.
And while this might not be about the follow-up process, I do just want to point out that because of BMF's size, they do not have the luxury of being as hands-on as, let's say, a private studio owner would. They're going to have to
Yes.
do things differently. And so having a salesperson, first off, take the card right there or send them a link and pay up front is a way to bring automation into the process. Because if that person pays, you know that they're showing up. Like they're
Yes.
not going to pay the $95 and then not show that class. And I do work with school owners all the time where they have the trial, they get good feelings about the
Right.
person there. Oh, I think and then they have just a horrid show up rate, but they don't have the guts to charge on the upfront. Or they
Yes.
just register them, whatever that means. So you guys are collecting cash up front. But Nate, I have to imagine, and I think this does go back to the follow-up topic, I have to imagine that because you're requiring the cash up front and there was no trial, it was literally just the phone call, would you say that, do you have a period of time in Brooklyn Music Factory where you did it differently and maybe the sales close rate was higher than it is now because you are making that bigger ask up front? I'm curious.
Great question. We tested out trial lessons
Mm-hmm.
as a process, and we do a version of trial lessons still, but it's purely seasonal. In
Mm.
other words, you can come up and test a mini class. We only do that like in the opening 2 weeks of every semester.
Oh.
And we only do that for inventory that we're still trying to sell, i.e., if we
Oh.
have like 15 spots left in our mini keys out of the 65 that we intend to sell, we'll open up a free mini class. So we do it in a very targeted way. But
That's
to
so
answer your
smart.
question about close rate, um, I don't have I can't give you a concrete answer except
Okay.
for to say that your point around scale is really important. That if you trust, first of all, you have a product that you are very confident in delivering on your promise with. We are very confident at Brooklyn Music Factory that we can deliver on promise at this point, 15 years into developing our curriculum. If you've got that product, then a risk-free registration is a great way to ensure that families see and experience the product without feeling like they're going in eyes wide shut. In other words, like we want them to give us $95 as a deposit, which is not much at all. It's like less than they spent on dinner out, right? So we're just saying $95 deposit, and then we'll process your tuition beginning the 1st of September, for example. Let's say we're enrolling in August. A $95 ask is not much to make to get a parent to commit. And just what I'll say on the sales funnel is I'm going to bring it back to that target enrollment number and how many confirmed we have. People ask all the time is like, wait, so is someone showing up as confirmed because they've paid all of the tuition already? Or when do you put that? I'm like, don't get caught in the weeds. A $95 deposit equals a confirmed enrollment. It's that simple. Without a credit card, you don't have a confirmed enrollment. Got it? It's so basic and simple. And as you scale your school, you move from that, 75 to 125 to 225. You have to abide by simplicity. Simple rules, simple funnel.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to constantly feel like you're stuck at 125 or 150. I'm sure there's a bunch of listeners that feel that way, right? Where they're just like, how come I've just been at the same number for 3 years? It's
Yeah.
because you're not consistent in your funnel. That's one reason. I'm just saying in terms of sales, because that's what we're focused on. Can I make one other highlight about something you said, and then we're going to move on to your next question, which is
Well, yeah, make that highlight. But then I have another question to ask you about everything you just said.
Okay, solid. We did a great episode with you all about the sales call and the trial lesson model. I can't remember which number it is. We'll put it in the show notes, though. That is an episode to couple with this when you want to get into the weeds about how to improve your communication with the family to get them to give you that $95 deposit.
Yeah,
right?
It was episode 77.
Love it. So we're not going to talk about what BMF actually says on the phone. We can do another episode if you want to hear just about Brooklyn Music Factory. I'll literally get Jessica in here as a guest. We could do that. But Daniel did a really good version of his system and how he used to do it in his studio. So you can get into the weeds on exactly what to say to parents to get them to give you that credit card.
Yeah,
Your question, Daniel.
That episode 77, is called Your Music School Sales Process. And I basically ranted for an hour about how to have a really, really good sales process. And that it remains one of my favorite episodes I've ever done. I really love that episode. I'm really proud of that episode. My question for you, Nate, was, so let's say you get in touch with them on the second call. They're a lead. You get in touch with them on the second call. You have the sales call. They say, you know what? We do want to sign up. Go ahead and send the link. 3 days later, your salesperson checks. They never paid. They committed to coming into the class. They said they were going to pay. You sent them the link. They didn't pay. It's been 3 days. What do you do?
Okay, if it's contact number 2, you've called them. You've emailed them for contact 3. You go straight to the text. You keep bugging them. They do not have a spot in your class until there's a $95 credit card.
Correct.
So they say they want it. They're probably not giving you the credit card for another 2 contacts. In other words, you're going to get all the way to the 5th email where you've bugged them and been like, hey, we still don't have a credit card. If they don't give you the credit card, they move into the lost column and we move on. Done.
Okay. So that's interesting because personally, and I don't know, maybe we'll have a debate. Maybe there'll be some thunder and lightning on the podcast today. But I would put someone who I have not had a contact with in a very different category than someone who had a phone call with, felt very promising, but then they just, for whatever reason, didn't follow through. I would probably contact them personally more than 5 times because of that personal touch. Do you guys not do that? And it wouldn't be a criticism. It wouldn't be me criticizing you guys. I'm just curious.
Well, in the study that I read earlier, they say 7 touch points is the golden number. So there are absolutely people or families that we will contact more than 5 times if they're what we call a hot lead. We literally have flames in the tool we use.
Nice.
So 5 flames means they're just smoking hot.
Yeah.
So who are examples of people that were going to go above and beyond the 5 contact points? Daniel, they're returning families.
Yes, I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, they're returning families. They're that camp family that's enrolled in camp for the past 3 years. We haven't heard from them when we've done our early bird special. And we're like, hey, wait, we know you guys want a spot. What's the deal? You want in? Because we want to make sure you get exactly what you want.
This is where you use your brain and you don't just become an automaton and be like, oh, Clayton Mask said 5 times. That's it. No, if they've been in your camp through the past 3 years, they're special. So, read the context clues.
Yeah. And to be clear, most of our listeners are likely not reaching out even 3 times.
I know they're not because I deal with this every single week. I in our marketing training, we have a whole section on the follow-up process, and it's rare that I meet someone that's doing more than a couple times. This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks.
What I want to add to that is, first of all, this is a judgment-free zone. This is just an empowering pod. The reason why I say most of our listeners have not followed up more than 3 times or even 1 time is because Brooklyn Music Factory used to be exactly there.
Yeah.
You know, that's why. I'm only talking from my own personal experience. When I was the sales guy, Daniel, I'm literally going through this right now with Big Music Games. We have, I don't even know how many teachers have created amazing free accounts at bigmusicgames.com/7FMS.
It's been a lot this year. Yeah.
It's been a ton. And my job is to follow up with them.
Yep.
You know, like a guy like me needs a really clear checklist on follow-up. Be like, okay, dude, now you need to text that awesome school in Texas and see, do they want in? Are they all in? Because until they actually give the credit card and say, yeah, I want to pay $19.95 a month and have all my teachers gamifying their lesson, they're not a customer yet.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm going to make a commercial for another episode we did just last week. Just last week, we were talking about Evernote. And one of the uses that I mentioned for my own Evernote usage was I keep track of every single school owner that I've ever talked to in the history of this business and for grouplessons.com. And right now, I've got a number of people in my follow-up folder that I'm following up with on a regular basis for grouplessons.com, you know, which is the best group lesson program system in the world for piano. And no offense, Nate. So anyway, the point is that the point is that again, with this being the no judgment zone, a lot of times people aren't achieving their full potential in terms of how they could be following up with people because they don't have a system in place for it, or they don't have a place where all these leads are living. They don't have, you know, for me, when I first started doing this, I literally just had a notepad file. Before I used Evernote, I had a notepad file, just a .txt on my desktop, and I would just type in the name, the email, the phone number, and, you know, a couple times a week I'd go through and look and be like, is it time for me to follow with them again yet or not? Eventually I got to a place where I had a better system using Evernote, and now I've got tools that are in some of my trainings where it's actually kind of like a custom lead database almost.
Yeah, totally. I mean, at a school the size of Brooklyn Music Factory, we have a CRM called Keap that we've been using forever. And, you know, there's no way we would track the like thousands of families that we're in contact with in any given year in my Evernote at this stage.
Right.
Like, I wish that, and anyways, I thought what I would do to sort of put, you know, to bring this episode into a close is talk about a couple of things. First of all, why this sales system matters to Brooklyn Music Factory. And then also, I mean, beyond just enrolling a bunch of students, why the system actually matters to a company like ours with, you know, 25 plus employees. And then B, I thought I would share a couple of bullets on what happens if you don't actually develop a consistent system for your school. Like, can I share those 2 bullets here? And I'm curious your questions and follow up.
Yeah. And Nate, I'm just going to say, write this down, but there's probably an episode here on how you train your salespeople, to be honest. That would be a really interesting, especially given a couple episodes ago, we did the delegation episode with Alyssa.
Yes.
And delegating that sales process out to people, one of the most important functions in your school, I think there's probably a good episode there. We should write us and tell us if you want to hear that. Although by the time this airs, we might have already recorded it. Who knows?
It's in Evernote, dude. I just made it.
Nice.
That's the power of Evernote. Go back 1 app and check that out. Okay. So, Okay, let me just share a few reasons why this is so important to me. Okay, and why it actually matters to your company that you have a system. Number one, if you're the one doing sales, if you're back to the early days of BMF, and I was the chief salesperson, Pira, my business partner, did sales for group classes, but really it was like she didn't love doing sales, but she definitely
Mm,
would. She definitely step up to the plate as needed. But it was mostly me. That was my
mm,
role. If you're the one doing sales, you need to actually trust your system and efforts, because otherwise you're gonna give up prematurely. Like if you don't have some sort of system like we do, of 5 clear touch points, then what happens is you start giving up. You're like, I guess I'm not very good at sales calls. I guess nobody wants piano lessons in Brooklyn. I guess not. You start coming up with all these reasons why you're no good at sales, right? So that's number one. You have to actually build a system, develop trust in it by showing up consistently. Secondly, if others are doing the sales, like this is the case now at the factory, then you need to actually be able to convince them that persistence matters. I literally read out loud from this book, as I mentioned, Conquer the Chaos, and shared with them again why persistence and consistency and 5 touch points actually matter. Because otherwise, we're losing out on 75% of all families that we could be serving at the factory, right? So you got to convince them that persistence matters. And then the team as a whole has to agree to all take the same number of actions with each lead that comes through, right? You all have to agree you're going to do these 5 touch points, because it's not a team effort if everybody's like flying solo and doing it their own way. It's no longer a team. Imagine like what was the movie I saw recently, Boys in the Boat, all about the Olympic rowing team,
yeah.
right? Imagine if everybody in the boat was rowing at their own cadence, or doing whatever they thought was going to be most useful to win the race. It just doesn't work like that. Like team, by definition, is that you're all aligned with the same target in mind, and you're trying desperately to row at the same pace so that you're moving in concert with one another, right? That's what we want to do as a team. So we want to make sure that they all take the same number of actions with each lead until that family is either a won or a lost, a WON or lost. Those are the only two options. You can have a lost and then reach back out later. That's fine. They can go into your email list. But you, as a team, you need to know we did these 5 touch points, and now this lead became a customer, enrolled at BMF, or they're lost, and we're going to put them in our long-term nurture campaign, just to, getting the monthly email newsletter or whatever, right? Finally, and this I think is the most important reason for all of our listeners, your business is just way, way more fun to run when you have a simple evidence-based guideline that you can use to enroll families and then measure results with. It's just so much more fun than every week waking up and thinking that you're supposed to iterate and find a new system to adopt. That just is a tiring, tiring way to go through scaling your music school from 50 students to 300 students. It just is exhausting. And it's why you may feel sometimes that you're putting out, 700 different fires. It's because you don't have a simple system that you've followed consistently enough for months and months and that you could then measure results with. Because if everybody's doing it differently, then your results are not quality results.
Yes. Yeah. There's a meme that goes around I see it like at least once a week, but it's that idea of consistency is better than intensity. And this is definitely one of those areas where you don't want all of a sudden be like, oh, yeah, it's lead follow up week this quarter. We're
Yeah,
gonna
totally.
follow up with all those leads. It's one of those things that you just have to show up every day for that. And there is a direct result that you can see in the sales and the growth of the school when you're doing it well and you're doing it consistently. I'd rather someone be mediocre at it but consistent than really, really good at it but only doing it every once in a while, to be honest.
Totally, dude. And you're going to do it seasonally. It's not like you're going to need 8 hours a day of lead follow-up in mid-November. You know, we need 8 hours of lead follow-up in the first 2 weeks of September for sure. You know, but there are going to be seasons where you only need a couple of hours to do those, to follow up with all of the leads in your funnel. And that's fine. That's great. So just know, if you're listening to this, it's not like you're, guns a-blazing 12 months a year and you're just like, wait, I have time to do nothing else if I follow Nate's system. It's not like that.
Yeah.
But the consistency is key.
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel, can I share in close what happens if you don't adopt a system?
Sure.
Right. And by the way, you can adopt what we shared today. You'll be like, I'm just going to freaking follow this exactly to the T. I'm going to go, I'm going to go email, call, email, text, email. That's going to be my form. Adopt it, use it. That's great. Or you can follow another system someone's coached you on. That's okay too. Whatever you do, buy into a system and use it consistently. So now, what happens if you do not use a consistent follow-up approach? First of all, I just mentioned this. You cannot now trust your results, right? Because you don't know whether it was because you reached out a dozen times that family enrolled, or you just got lucky with that one family. And maybe your website's so great that you're qualifying leads, and so it only takes one contact. Or maybe you start believing you're the only one who can do sales and nobody else at your school can actually enroll a family. Well, that's problematic, because how are you going to scale you, right? There's one of you with precious few hours, right? So you can't trust your results. Secondly, you start to question your entire funnel. You're just constantly second guessing your marketing. You're like, let's say you went through Daniel's marketing course. You're going back and you're like, oh, all I need to do is rewatch this whole course and that'll fix it. It's like, no, go through the course, do exactly what is taught you, implement it all, fix the top of your funnel, make a website that you think is pretty good, and then focus on that consistent lead follow-up. You don't want to be second guessing yourself all the time. You don't want to be second guessing your product. Maybe my teachers can't teach. Maybe I'm the only one who can teach a piano lesson at my school. That's the problem, right? You can't second guess your product every week. Otherwise, you're going to just be spinning in circles, right? Another reason why what'll happen if you don't have consistent follow-up is you just never create and maintain that marketing dashboard that Daniel and I have been talking about for, I don't even know how many years we've been doing the pod, 3 years, 140 episodes. You won't actually build and maintain a marketing dashboard because you're constantly trying to iterate the follow-up. And so you're just like, maybe until I get the system right. Once I get my system right, I can start updating a dashboard. No. That dashboard is essential. You need to put results you trust into the dashboard, and it needs to be based on actions that you're doing consistently. And then finally, the worst part of it all is that you end up feeling like a total failure at sales. Like all you could ever do was teach a piano lesson. You'll never be able to convince a mom that they should take your piano lessons. That is just a bummer way to go through life. Of course you can level up. You probably put in 10,000 hours on the piano, and you're probably a crushing pianist, right? If you can play Rachmaninoff, you can put together a sales system, right? You can absolutely do that. So, and you can probably follow it, because if you were consistent enough to shed and get your Rachmaninoff together, then you can definitely be consistent enough to follow up with the parent about piano lessons.
100%. And the good news is that persuasion, marketing, sales is a developable skill. And then once you've developed that skill, which by the way, it won't take you 20 years to become a master at that, like it might with piano, 10 years, 20, you can do it a lot faster. You can get good enough to be effective much faster.
Yes.
And then when you add to that consistency, you're golden.